Well, Senator Minner had her State of the State address today. And she didn't mention the human rights violations and the civil rights violations that occurred in the Delaware prison healthcare system. And the News Journal writer expressed some surprise about that, as did Senator Copeland. How could she not mention this incredible problem? I guess I don't get that. I guess I don't understand why people think that she would mention the human rights violations that occurred in our state during her State of the State address. I guess I don't get that because as I look at governments around the world and throughout history, when they engage in human rights violations, they don't tend to talk about them, do they? They don't tend to talk about them a lot. In fact, they tend to cover them up if they can. So, why would Governor Minner act differently? And when you come to think about it, why would she even acknowledge now in her State of the State address that the state of Delaware engaged in human rights violations in its prison system when the state entered into an agreement with the federal government denying that very thing? Now, the federal government said, as far as they were concerned, our medical system was abysmal. In fact, it was cruel. In fact, our medical care system in our prisons actually was a form of cruel and unusual punishment. But the federal government entered into an agreement with us which allowed us to rectify the problems that resulted in that finding by the federal government, but to do so in such a way that did not require the state of Delaware to admit that it had engaged in human rights violations of a particularly despicable sort, where we let people languish, dying slowly of ailments, diseases, that if they had received proper medical care, they could have survived. You see, governments don't tend to talk about the human rights violations they engage in. And when they do so, they almost always, end up denying that they've committed them. Well, that's the official position of the state of Delaware. It denies that it violated anyone's civil, constitutional, or human rights in its prison system. Think about it. Iran commits human rights violations. It rarely talks about it, but when it does, it denies it. Saudi Arabia engages in human rights violations. So does North Korea. But they deny it when asked. Colombia engages in rampant human rights violations. But when pressed on the subject, they deny that it ever happens. That's usually what occurs in governments, almost always without exception. So, because it happened in Delaware, you think it would be different? That we would talk about it? That we'd be upfront and acknowledge it? Why did you think that? Why did you think that we're different from a Saudi Arabia, an Iran, a North Korea in this regard? Why did you think we would be different? Because you live here. Because it would be difficult for you to think that you live in such a place that can commit these kinds of actions, these kinds of human crimes, and deny them. You think we would be upfront about this simply because it would make you uncomfortable to think that you live in such a place? Is that it? You don't want to admit that about Delaware because it makes you uncomfortable? Is it about